There is a fresh twist in the search for Nancy Guthrie. TMZ say they have been sent another ransom note claiming the missing 84-year-old is alive in Mexico with her kidnappers 70 miles south of her home in Tucson.
Yeah, for more on this, former FBI Special Agent Scott Curtis joins us from New York. Thanks for joining us, Scott. Today marks an agonising 68th day of the search. Tell us, how would police be handling this new tip-off?
Well, what they should be doing is to be tempering their response here, not getting overzealous, not having an impulse reaction to every tip, every lead that's coming in there, because they don't want to go down some rabbit hole that's unrelated or get distracted. They need to take a step back, assess every tip, every information there, review and analyze it, see what kind of corroboration they can find with the information there before they get too further involved there, where they may lose sight of really what are facts and what is true and accurate here in some of the information.
This ransom note aside for a sec, I mean, where is the police investigation at right now, do you think?
Well, I think, hopefully they are still receiving tips from the public here. I bet you they're also going back to square one, to day one here, and reevaluating what was done by law enforcement, maybe get a fresh set of eyes that maybe wasn't involved from the beginning, and maybe somebody that maybe, has a different perspective of the facts as we know it, and maybe generating through that information, that review and analysis, some additional leads to pursue.
On the night Nancy Guthrie came home, nothing about the evening seemed like it would become national news. She had spent time with family. She was dropped off at her Tucson area home. The garage door opened and closed, and then sometime in the quiet hours before dawn, something changed. By the next morning, an 84-year-old woman described by authorities as frail and limited in mobility was gone. Her purse and phone were still inside. Blood on the porch would later be confirmed as hers. Investigators say her pacemaker app lost connection around the same window of time that a masked, armed figure was captured tampering with her doorbell camera. Before long, ransom messages began to surface. No proof of life followed. No arrest did either. This case hit with unusual force, not only because of how disturbing the facts were, but because of who Nancy Guthrie was, the mother of national television anchor Savannah Guthrie. That meant the disappearance was not unfolding in private grief. It was unfolding in public, under a spotlight, with millions watching a family beg for answers while law enforcement tried to determine whether they were facing a kidnapping for ransom, a targeted abduction, or something even more complicated. And that is where this story becomes so unsettling. There are details that feel almost too precise to ignore. The disabled camera, the dropped medical connection, the confirmed blood, the open doors, the ransom demands in cryptocurrency, the gloves found miles away, the false lead that went nowhere, the search of a house, the release of a man without charges, and the growing fear that every passing day was draining the odds of a safe recovery. But even with all of that, the central question still hangs there, unanswered. Who took Nancy Guthrie from her home in the middle of the night? And why has no one been able to bring her back? If you follow true crime because the unresolved cases matter, stay with this one all the way through. The deeper you go into the timeline, the stranger it gets. To understand why Nancy Guthrie's disappearance shook so many people, you have to start with the basics of what authorities say made this case immediately abnormal. Nancy was 84 years old. Public reporting described her as frail and in need of regular medication, and investigators made clear very early that they did not believe this was a voluntary disappearance. That matters. And in many missing person cases, law enforcement spends the first crucial window trying to answer a basic question. Did the person leave by choice? Did they wander off? Or were they taken? In Nancy Guthrie's case, authorities moved quickly toward the third possibility. According to public reporting, they believed almost from the start that she had been abducted. The known timeline begins on Saturday, January 31st, 2026. Associated Press reported that Nancy took an Uber to join family for dinner. Then later that night, around 9:48 p.m., a family member dropped her back off at her home. The garage door opened and closed a few minutes later. On the surface, that detail sounds ordinary. It is the kind of mundane digital footprint that people rarely think about until an investigation turns every ordinary second into evidence. But by the next day, the routine had broken. Nancy did not show up where she was expected. She was reported missing on February 1st. And that is when the house itself began telling a darker story. According to Reuters and AP, investigators found blood on the porch that was later confirmed to be Nancy's. AP also reported signs of forced entry. Savannah Guthrie later said publicly that the back doors were found open and that Nancy's phone and purse were still inside the home. Those are not the kinds of details that suggest a person quietly chose to leave. They suggest interruption, they suggest vulnerability, they suggest that whatever happened, it likely happened fast. Then there is the medical clue, one of the most haunting in the entire case. Nancy used a pacemaker app, and according to Reuters and AP, that app lost connection around the same time investigators say the home's doorbell camera was tampered with. That is the kind of detail that changes the emotional temperature of a case. A dropped connection is not just technical noise here. It becomes part of the timeline. It becomes one more marker, suggesting that in the early morning hours, systems were being disrupted, visibility was being removed, and Nancy's world was being cut off. And then came the image that made the case even harder to dismiss as anything less than deliberate. Law enforcement later released doorbell footage showing a masked person wearing gloves, carrying a backpack, and appearing to have a holstered gun, tampering with the camera. It was one of the most concrete visuals investigators had, and it gave the public something rare in an unresolved abduction case. Not a vague possibility, but a specific, chilling snapshot of someone who appears to have been at the scene, taking active steps to avoid being recorded. That image did two things at once. It intensified the case, and it narrowed the mystery. Because once you have a person on camera, armed and masked, messing with the surveillance system before an elderly woman disappears from that same property, the question is no longer whether something serious happened. The question becomes whether that person acted alone, whether Nancy was specifically targeted, and what happened in the gap between that footage and the moment she vanished. There was another factor that elevated the urgency. Nancy's family did not have the luxury of treating this like a slow burn investigation. Public reporting says she needed medication, and law enforcement noted her age and physical limitations. In cases like this, time is not just important. Time is brutal. Each hour strips away possibilities. Each day increases the chance that a trail goes cold, that memory fades, that technology yields only fragments, and that may be why the public appeals hit as hard as they did. Savannah Guthrie and her siblings did not appear before the public as media figures first. They appeared as children of a missing mother trying to speak directly into the void. Their early video messages, according to ABC and Reuters, were directed at whoever might have Nancy. They asked for contact. They said they wanted proof she was alive. They signaled willingness to pay if that meant getting her back safely. Then it was a family trying to force some kind of response from someone who had already shown they could move in darkness and stay hidden. At this point in the case, the outline seemed clear enough to terrify people. Elderly woman, quiet night, suspicious figure on camera, blood at the home, open doors, missing by morning. But here's where things got even stranger. Almost immediately, the story stopped being only about what happened at the house. because after Nancy disappeared, messages began to arrive claiming someone had taken her, and those messages would pull the investigation into a second maze entirely. If the first phase of the Nancy Guthrie case was about a house that seemed to hold signs of a forced disappearance, the second phase was about communication. Not clear communication, not reliable communication. The worst kind, just enough to create hope, just enough to create fear, and nowhere near enough to provide certainty. Within days of Nancy being reported missing, media outlets began receiving messages that appeared to be ransom demands. Associated Press reported that a local television station received an email that looked like a ransom note on February 2nd. Reuters later reported that ransom communications demanded payment in cryptocurrency and that the sums mentioned were in the millions. ABC also reported on deadline-driven ransom demands and the uncertainty around whether the sender was truly connected to Nancy's disappearance. That uncertainty is crucial. In a case like this, a ransom note sounds like direction. But investigators still have to ask a basic question. Is the note from the actual abductor, or from someone exploiting a case already in the headlines? Public reporting indicates that authorities treated at least some of the ransom communications seriously, but they were also trying to determine which messages, if any, were genuine. That put the family and law enforcement in an excruciating position. If the messages were real, every minute mattered. If they were fake, every minute spent reacting to them could misdirect the case. This is where the emotional pressure on Nancy's family became impossible to ignore. Savannah Guthrie and her siblings released video messages directed toward the person or people who might have Nancy. Reuters and ABC reported that they asked for contact and, critically, for proof of life. That is one of the most painful phrases in any missing person case. High because it reveals the terrifying threshold the family had crossed. They were no longer asking only for Nancy's return. They were asking for confirmation that she was still alive. According to Reuters, authorities said there was no proof of life, but at that stage also no proof of death. That left the case suspended in one of the cruelest spaces possible, between evidence of violence and the absence of final certainty. And when a case is suspended there, every development becomes overloaded. Every tip feels enormous. Every rumor becomes dangerous. Every public statement gets passed for hidden meaning. Law enforcement responded with scale. Reuters reported that investigators fanned out, processed tips, used drones and dogs, seen and searched for evidence that might anchor the case in something more solid than electronic disruption and anonymous demands. That makes sense. A camera can be tampered with. Messages can be spoofed. But physical evidence, if you get it, can pull a case back into focus, and for a moment it seemed that might happen. One of the strongest investigative leads involved gloves found roughly 2 miles from Nancy's home. Reuters reported that investigators believed the gloves resembled those worn by the person seen in the surveillance footage. More importantly, they yielded DNA in a high-profile abduction. That kind of development can feel like a breakthrough. DNA means a person. A person means a possible identity. An identity means a path forward. But cases like this are full of moments that look like progress until they collapse under scrutiny. According to Reuters, the DNA from the gloves did not match anyone in the National CODIS database. Then, in another twist, the gloves were traced to a local restaurant employee who was later cleared and not considered a suspect. It was a sharp setback. One of the most promising-looking pieces of evidence had lost much of its force. And when that happens in a live investigation, something subtle but important shifts. Public confidence weakens, speculation expands, the sense that the case may be slipping starts to grow. There was also the search of a home in Rio Rico and the detention of a man for questioning. Reuters reported that no arrest followed, and the man was later released. Again, the case seemed to surge forward, then recoil. And that pattern matters because it shaped how the public experienced the investigation. This was not a neat sequence of clue, suspect, arrest. It was a sequence of clue, uncertainty, pressure, apparent lead, disappointment. As the days passed, the reward grew. Reuters reported that the FBI increased its reward to $100,000 and released additional visuals. A P reported that the family later offered up to $1 million for information, leading to Nancy's recovery. That escalation says a lot. Rewards grow when authorities need movement, when tips matter, when visibility matters, when the case needs new oxygen. But it also reflects reality. By late February, this investigation had already failed to produce the one thing that would change everything: a confirmed location for Nancy Guthrie. And then came one of the most emotionally sobering public moments in the entire case. Reuters reported that when the family announced the $1 million reward, Savannah Guthrie acknowledged publicly for the first time that Nancy might no longer be alive. That statement did not close the case. It did not mean authorities had changed their official stance into certainty. But emotionally, it marked a shift. Hope was still there, but it had changed shape. It was no longer the bright hope of an imminent reunion. It was the strained hope of a family trying to remain open to a miracle while bracing for the possibility of something else. And through all of this, the most important facts remained stubbornly fixed. Nancy was last confirmed home on January 31st. A masked, armed person was seen tampering with the camera. The pacemaker app connection dropped. Blood at the scene was confirmed to be hers. Ransom messages circulated, but questions about their authenticity lingered. A major physical lead on the gloves faded. A detained man was released. No one was charged. No one publicly identified as a suspect. That is the kind of investigative landscape that produces competing theories fast. And in Nancy Guthrie's case, those theories would start hardening before the public had anything close to a full answer. But here is the danger. Theories can help organize a mystery, or they can distort it. And in this case, the line between those two is very thin. By the time the Nancy Guthrie case had moved from emergency search to long-running national mystery, 3 broad theories had emerged in public discussion. None has been proven. None fully explains every known fact. But each one tells you something important about how people are trying to make sense of a case that still resists resolution. The first theory is the one most closely aligned with what investigators appeared to believe early on: a genuine abduction connected to a ransom demand. There are obvious reasons people find this theory persuasive. Authorities say a masked, armed person was caught tampering with the home's camera. Nancy, an elderly woman with limited mobility, vanished in the same time window. Blood confirmed to be hers was found on the porch. Her phone and purse were left behind. Ransom communications followed. On its face, that sequence appears to fit the skeleton of a kidnapping case. What supports that theory is the coherence of the early timeline. The camera interference suggests planning. The armed figure suggests control or threat. The dropped medical device connection suggests disruption happening in the house or around it. The condition of the home suggests Nancy did not simply walk away. And the ransom messages, whether clumsy or sophisticated, point toward financial motive. But what weakens that theory is what did not happen. There was no public proof of life. There was no publicly confirmed exchange. There was no public arrest tied to a ransom operation. And as the case stretched on, the communications did not seem to lead investigators toward a solvable trail. If this was a straightforward abduction for money, why has there been so little visible evidence of a stable extortion process? Why expose yourself on camera, leave physical signs behind, and then fail to capitalize in a way that produces a clear suspect path? Those questions do not destroy the theory, but they do complicate it. The second theory is that the ransom communications may have been partially or entirely opportunistic, while the underlying disappearance had a different motive. This theory exists because, in high-profile cases, opportunists do appear. A BC reported on uncertainty over whether the ransom sender was the real abductor. Reuters also reported investigative caution around the evolving communications. So one possibility is that Nancy was indeed abducted, but the messages that followed were not a clean reflection of the person responsible. They may have been noise layered onto the crime. What supports that theory is the confusion itself, the deadlines, the lack of proof of life, with the ambiguity over authenticity and the fact that investigators seem to be sorting through which communications mattered, all suggest the possibility that not every message came from the same source. If that is true, the investigation may have had to fight on two fronts at once, the real abduction and the fake digital aftershocks. What weakens this theory is that it can become too convenient. It risks treating every unclear communication as outside interference rather than part of the original crime. Without public forensic detail on the messages, it remains just that, a possibility. It explains confusion but not identity. It explains noise but not Nancy's location. The third theory is the broadest and, in some ways, the darkest, that Nancy may have been specifically targeted for reasons not yet publicly known. And not necessarily because of celebrity proximity alone, and not necessarily at random either, but because someone knew her routines, her vulnerability, or the layout of the house. Public reporting has not announced a motive, and police have not publicly named a suspect. Still, people ask whether the precision of the timing suggests prior knowledge, camera tampering before the disappearance, an elderly victim unlikely to overpower, an intruder, a quick vanishing. Those details lead some observers to wonder whether this was not opportunistic at all, but chosen. What supports that theory is the apparent preparation. A mask, gloves, a backpack, and a visible weapon on camera are not the markers of an impulsive doorstep encounter. They suggest readiness. The problem is that readiness does not tell you motive. It only tells you the person seen on camera likely did not arrive accidentally. What weakens that theory is the absence of publicly confirmed context. We do not know from the public record whether Nancy had been watched, threatened, followed, or specifically selected. We do not know whether the person on camera had prior connection to her or to the household. Investigators may know more than they have released, but from the outside, the theory remains an inference, not a conclusion. There is also a broader issue here that makes this case resonate beyond the immediate mystery: the vulnerability of elderly people in missing person and abduction cases. Whether this case ultimately turns out to be ransom-driven, targeted, or something more complex, the facts already underscore how quickly age and medical dependency can magnify danger. And when an older adult disappears under violent or suspicious circumstances, the timeline compresses brutally. Search urgency rises, public appeals become more desperate, and every unresolved day becomes heavier than it would in many other cases. The media dimension also matters. Because Nancy Guthrie was Savannah Guthrie's mother, the case unfolded with intense public scrutiny. That can help an investigation by generating leads and keeping pressure high, but it can also flood the landscape with rumor, theory, and false confidence. In a case with a masked figure, ransom demands, and no arrest, speculation multiplies fast. And when speculation outruns evidence, it can blur the very thing the public says it wants most, the truth. By early April, Reuters reported that Savannah Guthrie had returned to the Today Show after roughly 2 months away, and Nancy was still missing. That image says something no press conference can fully capture. The world keeps moving. Broadcasts resume. Headlines turn. But somewhere underneath all of that, a family is still living inside the same unanswered sentence. Their mother went home, and then she vanished, and maybe that is why this case has stayed with so many people. Not because every clue is dramatic, but because the known facts are just solid enough to feel real and just incomplete enough to remain haunting. The camera, the blood, the lost connection, the messages, the gloves, the release of a detained man, the $1 million reward. None of it has closed the circle, so the central mystery survives, sharper than ever. But if the figure on camera is the key, who is it? If the ransom messages were real, why did they lead nowhere public? If they were fake, what were they hiding? And above all else, where is Nancy Guthrie? That question is where the case still lives. And it is also where this story has to end. Nancy Guthrie is not just the subject of an unsolved headline. She is a missing mother, a missing grandmother, a human being whose last known night has now been replayed and re-examined by millions because the ending still has not come. Authorities say she was likely taken. Public reporting shows clear signs of disruption at her home. The family has pleaded, investigators have searched, rewards have grown, and yet the most important answer remains out of reach. If you have a theory on what happened in this case, share it in the comments. But keep it responsible and grounded in what is actually known. Share this documentary so more people can see Nancy Guthrie's story, and subscribe for more true crime coverage that stays careful with facts and focused on the people at the center of these cases. And if you have credible information related to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, the right place for that is law enforcement, not the comment section.